On the 12th of October 2015, Parliament will discuss the production, sale and recreational use of cannabis. What's unique about this debate is that it has been forced onto the agenda through a successful e-petition amassing over 200,000 signatures. Despite not being officially supported by any of the main political parties, the success of cannabis legalisation in the USA has meant the debate can no longer be ignored. I spoke to Peter Reynolds, former leader of Clear UK, and a leading advocate in the pro-cannabis movements about why so many people are supporting pro-legalisation. Who are Clear and what are you campaigning for?
Well, Clear is the largest UK cannabis law reform group. We're a drugs policy group, but the word we use to describe what we do now is lobbying, because really that's what we're about. We're about communicating with MPs, because they're the people who've got the power to change the law. And the law we want to change is the law that prohibits cannabis.
Is there really an appetite for change with the general public?
Yes, undoubtedly. I mean, there's been, over the last few years, there's been a number of surveys done, and whilst we can't rely on surveys completely, it's pretty clear that the majority of people, typically around about 60 to 70%, would support some sort of reform of the laws.
How significant is the debate in Parliament?
I think it's very significant, the fact that we've achieved this debate and that we've achieved it through a government e-petition. What effect the actual debate will have itself is another matter. I think it's highly likely that it will be poorly attended. I think it's highly likely that the Tory party in particular will probably tell its MPs not to attend. Some of them will, nevertheless. But it will be shut because MPs are scared about it. It's an issue they're terrified of, because they're frightened of what the press will say. They're frightened if they say something remotely supportive, they'll be seen as being soft on drugs. So what actual impact it will have, I don't know. But we are in a war of attrition. We are wearing down the opposition. Our arguments are irrefutable. There is no logical case to continue the prohibition of cannabis, but we're fighting against 80 years of prejudice and propaganda, and we are making progress, and this debate is another brick in the wall, or another brick out of the wall, if you like.
What do you say to those who feel it is not worth the risk to mental health?
Well, the risks to mental health are very, very small. I know it's difficult to believe that when you see how many column inches are devoted to the subject, in the tabloid press. But the risks to mental health are very, very small. Perhaps the best summary of that is that in 2008 rather, there was a big scare campaign going on in the newspapers. Cannabis had been downgraded to Class C from Class B, and there was a big scare campaign in the Daily Mail and the Telegraph and the Sun about it causing mental health problems. There were all sorts of stories about, cannabis crazed and axe murderers and all this sort of thing. And as a result of that, the ACMD, the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs, commissioned Keele University to carry out a study into mental health in the UK. And it's very, very simple. The use of cannabis since the 1960s, if you draw a graph, it's gone like that. So if there was any causal link between the use of cannabis and psychosis of schizophrenia, you'd expect it to not necessarily match it, but at least go in the same direction. In fact, it goes the opposite way. The rate of psychosis and schizophrenia is stable or slightly declining. So despite the fact you've got this huge curve in cannabis, the line of schizophrenia and psychosis actually goes slightly down. So how can the two possibly be related?
Why would a non-cannabis user support this?
Well, for the resource issue, first of all. There's three main issues in the cannabis thing. One is the social issue, which is the massive social harm caused by the prohibition of cannabis. That's resources taken away from law enforcement or proper crime, if you like. That's, children involved by criminal gangs into the use of the drug, the trafficking of the drug. Properties taken over, rental properties taken over and trashed as secret farms are set up. Dangerous secret farms, often where electricity is stolen and fires can start. So there's those social harms that would be taken away. And if you're a non-user of cannabis, that affects you just as much as whether you're a user or not. There's the medical argument, which we can come on to. People who don't use cannabis, wouldn't consider using cannabis as a recreational substance, would more than likely find. Cannabis is a remarkable substance that we know of for at least 10,000 years for medicinal reasons. And people who wouldn't use cannabis recreationally may well find that it could be helpful to them in a therapeutic sense. And the third argument is the economic argument, because as well as all the money we're going to save, at the moment we spend £6 billion a year on cannabis in the UK. And we commissioned independent research back in 2011 that shows if you implemented a tax and regulate policy, by the time we've got VAT to recover, you've got a special cannabis tax as they've implemented in Colorado and Washington. Savings plus additional income could produce a net gain to the UK economy of up to £9.5 billion a year. So there's lots of reasons why everybody should support this, whether or not they're interested in consuming cannabis themselves.
What do you say to those who are worried it will become a gateway drug?
Well, it's nonsense. And it's been shown to be nonsense time after time. It's a popular myth. There are a lot of popular myths about cannabis, most of them dreamt up by tabloid journalists who've got nothing better to do. Even the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs, who the government always turn to for advice on these issues, even in their last report, they said quite simply there's no evidence of a gateway effect. There's no evidence that people who use cannabis will go on to using harder drugs. The real gateway drug, if you like, is probably alcohol, in the sense that that's the first drug, or nicotine, because those are the first drugs that anybody uses, and they then go on to use it. So you can easily say, and this is how the argument is used and how it breaks down, you can easily say that most heroin addicts will have used cannabis in the past. Of course they will have done, but they'll also have drunk milk or drunk Coca-Cola. The two things there's no causal link between the two. The only real issue here is that if you put cannabis or any substance into a criminal market, then in order to access it, you have to deal with criminals. And if I go and buy my cannabis from a criminal, he may well say to me, well, how do you fancy some of this as well? So that's the only real gateway. And of course you can do away with that gateway, or you can minimise that gateway by bringing cannabis under proper regulatory control.
How influential is its success in the USA going to be on whether we legalise it here?
Fundamental. I think there is so much fear based on media hype in this country that the only thing that will make our government move is unstoppable weight of evidence from the US. And I think that when presumably Hillary Clinton is inaugurated as the next US president in January 2017, by then probably at least another half a dozen states will have legalised cannabis all round. By 2020, the US, the largest market research company in the world, is forecasting that the US legal cannabis market will be worth $20 billion a year. Mr. Cameron and Mr. Osborne, or whoever's in power, I'm not going to be able to resist it. It's going to be an unstoppable force.
What are the medicinal benefits?
Well, the medicinal use of cannabis is really the thing that drives me. It's the most important aspect of it, in my view. I regard it as an outrage on my personal liberty that I'm prevented from using it for whatever reason I want to, just the same as I can grow cabbages or beetroots or potatoes in my garden. It's ridiculous to stop somebody growing a plant. But there are some people for whom cannabis can have a transformational effect on their lives. And I see this with my own eyes again and again and again. Mostly it's about chronic pain. Chronic pain which is only relieved otherwise, or only you can attempt to relieve otherwise by things like opiates, morphine, synthetic versions of morphine, or morphine like tramadol, forms of antidepressants like amitriptyline, which is often used for pain. And these things can be terribly toxic, terribly debilitating, turn you into a zombie. Whereas many people find that just using a small amount of cannabis helps them deal with chronic pain in a much more effective and much safer way than these sort of prescription medicines. But there are also specific conditions such as glaucoma, high pressure in the eyes, which cannabis has been shown to alleviate, Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis. The most extraordinary results, it's one of the few conditions where there's been proper clinical trials done, and the results are astounding. Something like 45% of people achieving significant remission of symptoms. 95% of people achieving significant remission, and 45% of people achieving complete remission of their symptoms. And the alternatives to this are highly toxic, very expensive pharmaceutical products. So the medicinal benefits are quite extraordinary. There's been a big campaign to try and suppress the truth about the medicinal benefits. But we've published another document, Medicinal Cannabis, the Evidence, and it shows quite conclusively that we've used it for 10,000 years for medicine. We know that from archaeological evidence. It's an obscenity, frankly. I can't put it strongly enough how evil it is that people are being denied access to this cheap, safe and effective medicine.
What is the best way for people to get involved?
Well, I would say this, wouldn't I? But the best way they can get involved is to join Clear. I mean, we now have nearly 500,000 followers on social media. Makes this an enormous movement. But 3 million people in this country use cannabis regularly. And when I say regularly, I mean at least once a month. 3 million people, that's 5% of the population. Only 2% of the population goes to Catholic Church regularly. So I mean, in terms of our impact and our influence in society, we're actually underrepresented at the moment.
Will cannabis be legalised in your lifetime?
Oh yes. Assuming I make it to my early 60s, I've got no doubt at all. I think cannabis we will have some medicinal access within the space of this Parliament. So within the next 4 to 5 years, I'm confident we will have some form of medicinal access. In 10 years at the outside, I would say, we will have legal access for adults. I'm confident of that.